All right, everyone, we're going to go ahead and get started. I just want to say good afternoon to you all. Good morning to some of you out there. You know, there's certainly quite a bit going on in the world right now, so we're certainly appreciative that you're spending your time here with us. We're hopeful that you'll find this presentation and conversation really a valuable use of that time. Just a quick note, if you have joined us, during webinars before, this will not count towards continuing education credit.
I'm Klaus Blache. Again, first, thanks everybody for joining us in these challenging times. Those of you that don't know me, I'll kind of do a real quick, backwards from my current position. Retired early from GM, 11 years at the university as a professor in the College of Engineering and director of the Reliability Maintainability Center. Just a couple examples of when I was at corporate world. I was at positions like manufacturing engineering director at Cadillac, at General Motors, global responsibility for reliability and maintenance for GM for quite a few years. I was a manager of corporate industrial engineering, which included global benchmarking. I was in plant management. And way back in the early days, I was one of those few that were started with SMRP, the Society of Maintenance Reliability Professionals, when that got off the ground. And I was a chairman for a couple of years. So, well, we'll stop there. That's enough to get us going.
And Klaus, can you tell us a little bit about the University of Tennessee and the RMC there, please?
Yeah, probably what's relevant, for this is it's the only university that I'm aware of in North America, and why I targeted going there, that has both an undergraduate and graduate program, degree program in reliability and maintainability engineering. And the center started, I think it's about 26 years ago. It was actually before my time, and with a handful of sponsoring companies. And when I got there, they were kind of in the high 20s or so. And now we're over 80 companies supporting us, and we focus on advancing reliability, maintainability concepts, best practices throughout industry, and also through our students. And in short, without getting into a lot of detail, we're mainly interested in practical application and how do we help industry on the bottom line, and productivity, efficiency, safety, quality, profitability, and so on, through advancing the R&M concept. So we like to deliver things to the bottom line. So that which is kind of the focus of the center. And that should be enough to.
Cool. Thanks so much, Klaus. So hi, everybody, and welcome. My name is Jeff Dalto. I work with Vector Solutions, and in particular, a part of Vector Solutions called Convergence Training. First of all, we're really excited to have Klaus with us. We've been working with Klaus and his team members for about a year, so it's a great benefit to us. Secondly, welcome to all of you, and thanks for your time. We scheduled this webinar in December before we knew what the COVID-19 pandemic was going to be doing globally today. So I think I want to echo Carol and Klaus's comments and expand on that. Say, first of all, just take time to say, we hope you are all safe and healthy and doing well, not just yourself, but your family and your coworkers. And yeah, it's a trying time, so stay healthy. Back to normally scheduled programming here. Again, my name is Jeff Dalto. I'm a learning and development specialist. I've worked for about 15 or 20 years in industrial manufacturing and safety training and other learning and development kind of programs along those ways. I've helped a lot of companies start their online training program, probably more than 50 at least, including learning management systems and e-learning courses. And I also write the Convergence Training blog. At any time today or in the future, if you have any questions, feel free to use my email address on the screen here. We'll show email addresses again at the end of this presentation as well. And I'm happy to take any questions. Briefly, I work for a company called Vector Solutions. Vector is a provider of software as a service-based, compliance-driven enterprise e-learning, workforce management, and performance improvement solutions. Again, I'm with a part of Vector called Convergence Training, and my coworker Carol, who started off the webinar, is with a different part called Red Vector, but you can think of us all as the same. There's more information about us here, as you see. And Klaus, back to you. Could you, Klaus, the UT RMC and our company Vector partner in something called the Reliability and maintainability implementation certification. Can you tell us a little bit about that, Klaus?
Sure, I'll keep that brief so we can get more into the content of some of the other stuff we want to talk about. But we'll talk a little bit about developing a roadmap, and R&M excellence. But the way the process works is we like to look at it as 3 + 3 + a project. 3 classes come from us at the university. There's 1 required boot camp, which is one of the 3 classes. And then 3 classes can come from our training partners, 1 being Red Vector or Vector Solutions. And so that means like Vector Solutions, you can do 120 hours, so 40 hours, that's 1 week, counts as 1 vendor class. So you can do 120 hours of Red Vector training, and that counts for the 3 vendor classes, in focus areas so that you want to get better at. And so then it's 3 + 3 + a project, and the project's guided by an RMC consultant. Those are typically retirees that have 25, 35 years experience in the area that you're going to be doing your project on. And the project is a measurable deliverable back to your place of work. So it isn't a book report or just a white paper and so on. What's unique about it is that the RMIC certification went through UT Legal, et cetera, and it's sanctioned by the College of Engineering, and it's registry marked to the College of Engineering. So you can put it on your business card, recognized and sanctioned by the College of Engineering. So I don't believe there's anything like that available for sure in North America that I'm aware of. So that's it.
All right, thanks, Klaus. And all right, so today we're going to break this hour up into 3 big sections. First, a model that Klaus and his team have created for competitive excellence. Klaus will talk us through that. We'll talk a little bit, Klaus and I both, about learning and continuous improvement at work. And then I'll wrap it up by giving you some information about general workplace learning models and some online tools that you can use as part of it. Now, again, this is not going to be anything about COVID-19, but obviously a lot of companies this week and past weeks have been scrambling to put some training online. So at the very end, I'll give you reference to some blog articles we've been writing, ways that you can do this cheaply, maybe freely, without expense at all, quickly. And again, I welcome you to email me if you have questions about that, and all that materials at the Convergence Training blog. So with that said, we're going to start talking with Klaus about his competitive excellence model. And Klaus, can you just give us an overview of what we're seeing on the screen here?
Sure. Probably the best way to introduce that is maybe a typical week or weeks in a month is I get a lot of phone calls, and the typical scenario question might be is I just got moved from operations to reliability, and the question might be what do I need to do? Where do I start? Can you tell me what I need to know? And it's kind of, I got a smile on the phone, realizing what they're asking me. And, I could get into, saying, here's, you got to do PM optimization, kitting, operator care, RAM modeling, RCA, reliability growth, it kind of goes on and on. I can list 100 items. And what I really tell them is if you got a desk, put your feet up on it, because it's going to take me a lifetime, because I'm still working on it. And people don't understand that it's a lifetime journey, just like the competitive excellence model and the things that you need to do. And the model that we use really started over 10 years ago. And looked at about 8 to 10 different models that are out there. And when it came down to it, 80% of the words in all the models were about the same. Some had pyramids like this, some had matrices, some had circle diagrams, some had flow charts, but it ended up being the same. And we were in the process of doing some mentoring with Novellus, who actually put a lot of the squares into that model. So it was really their team that did a lot of that. But then beyond that, it ends up differentiating. They put their stuff behind it, and we put our stuff behind what we teach and what we do, but I'm sure a lot of the content, is not going to be that different. And then on the right-hand side of the model, it fit our stages very well of how we think you need to build competitive excellence, from creating the culture to standardizing the work process to optimizing and sustaining, and then managing the life cycle process. And so it fit our flow very good. And then some of the differences, though, is that we tied it into our Plan, Do, Check, Act. And we put a much greater emphasis on improving the culture. And that's why we say improve the bottom layers first. And some of the stuff's been published by Novellis, and it was in Plant Engineering Magazine in September 2011. You can find that online. I believe the article was called Reliability is More Than Maintenance, and it was written by Novellis, and it tells you a little bit more about the model. And again, so the front part, is, kind of looks the same as ours, but behind the scenes it's pretty much, different on the direction that we take.
Great. And Klaus, to the point you just made a little bit ago about how a lot of these models have some similarity, here's a little tie-in you gave me to the SMRP body of knowledge.
Yeah, the reason I had you add this slide is that, I was involved early on and still on to some extent with a lot of the SMRP stuff. So I aligned our model that we use with the SMRP body of knowledge, which has a lot of the similar information, but it didn't really have an implementation plan or process. And so since a lot of people are working with the SMRP body of knowledge, this simply shows that all those areas are covered within the competitive excellence model.
All right, fantastic. Now, what we'd like to have you do kind of briefly is walk us through each of these levels. So I'm going to advance to the first level. Can you tell us a little bit more about this one?
Sure, let me look at the slide here.
And can you see it as the create the culture level?
Yep. Yeah, and again, looking at all the pieces across the row there, when you look at that, first of all, you've got to align the KPIs towards the desired behavior. If you want to, again, to get but then the more important part is how do you work with supporting those behaviors that drive those KPIs? And you do need a plan. As I started to list, I could have listed 100 things that you need to do to get this right. You need some kind of roadmap, with action plans, with deliverable first steps, and how you move forward through all these pieces. Because I'm going to say multiple times as we talk about these things, it's all related. You can't do just one or two pieces and expect it to work. The organizational culture obviously is the most critical and what most people still struggle with. And a big part of that is you need to develop a safe space for people to discuss the real problems so they can talk about it, and it's part of that developing partnerships. And you need to get your workforce and processes ready for this change, not just go out and implement it. And then the reliability networking, our network, that gets in the linking the departments throughout the plant, getting them all involved, multiple plants sharing. If you have multiple plants working on this, it's about developing partnerships between operations and maintenance. And then I put the document control was in there, and simple to say, well, why is that there? And I looked at that a little bit too when it was put there early on. But I think it's in the right place because I think one of the things that I really see people struggling with still is data integrity. So I think if you need to include early on the importance of data integrity, because again, that drives all the CMMS and all the planning and scheduling and all the process behind it. And at the end of the day, data integrity is a cultural issue more than anything else. So that's
okay. Yeah. Great. Sorry to step on you there, Klaus.
That's okay. You're going to keep me on time. That's your job. That's a good thing.
Okay. Second level, standardize the work process.
In standardizing the work processes, well, we could start on, doesn't matter which side we start on. If we start on the right side by lubrication, obviously everybody in the business understands the importance of the right kind and when to lubricate. And ideally you want to commonize it. You want lots of visual controls. We all know the cleanliness filtration is important. And that also eventually goes over and becomes a preventative maintenance task way over on the left. And that could be time-based or measurable to some extent, along with other proactive efforts. And then your condition-based really reflects both your predictive and the condition-based using the predictive technologies that go with that. Work management includes things also, not just what it states, but it includes planning and scheduling. It includes proper use of your computerized maintenance management system. And the materials management is everything from, we'll just say parts rationalization do you have a materials management process that works? And you can simply look at if you're spending more than 20% of your maintenance budget, or let's say it this way: if you look at your MRO spares stores dollar value, and if that dollar value is more than 20% of what your maintenance budget is, you're spending way too much. And then we're finding out that percentage can range from 20% best practice, top quartile, to over 75% for highly reactive plants.
All right, great. So we got standardizing the work processes, and then the next level is optimize and sustain.
Yeah, keeping it going, and maybe a good way to start with this one is to talk about maintenance versus maintainability. And a lot of people use those words together as if they mean the same thing, and they don't. Maintenance is the process of the replacing, the fixing, the repairing. It's the actual work itself. Maintainability is really a designed-in parameter. It's accessibility, it's modularity, it's being able to find, it's the ease of maintenance itself. And we teach over 30 modules of design for maintainability, and those are things that have to be designed in up front. It's that design for maintainability when you're buying the equipment, and when you hear things like, by the time you buy the equipment, 95% of your opportunity for improvement is gone. That's what they're really talking about. And so that's that first box, equipment and process design. Life cycle procurement, ties into that. If you look into your purchasing specs and you have nothing in there around purchasing for reliability and maintainability, well, then it's never going to get better. Is your equipment buy have words in there relative to reliability and maintainability? If not, it's not going to get that much better. Root cause analysis covers all the traditional things that you would think of, like 5 whys or fishbone or Ishikawa diagram, whatever you call it. Logic trees, cause and effect mapping, and so on. But I also put in there PM optimization, FMEAs. They're all larger long-term problem-solving tools.
Okay, great. And then last, we've got some best practices related to reliability and maintainability life cycle asset management.
Yeah, that kind of gets back to what I said earlier. It's all related. All these programs work together, and even early on, TPM was the owner operator, which is really what they call autonomous maintenance. The more later buzzword is operator driven reliability, which is really pretty much the same thing. But as we get to the top of doing a lot of these best practices, and also along the way, we need to make sure that your processes support each other. And because a lot of times when I look at companies, as we do kind of our 3-day assessments, we see opposing KPIs. And so again, it isn't just, yep, we're all on the same team doing this together. Are the things that the people that are implementing get measured on, do they truly really support each other?
Okay. And then as you mentioned earlier, you kind of added your PDCA cycle for asset management.
Yeah, maybe a few words. I mean, the Plan, Do, Check Act. Actually, I had the opportunity to work with Dr. Deming in the early days at Powertrain. He actually wanted it to be Plan, Do, Study Act, but I think it was the consultants got it out of the chute too fast, and he couldn't even pull it back. So it became Plan, Do, Check Act. But many times sustaining is just as difficult, if not more important and difficult, than if you're fortunate enough even to get there. So you do need a formal process that defines best practices, your standard operating procedure, and a quote that Deming said frequently, in meetings and stuff, and I'm sure he's published it. It says, "Tampering with a stable system is not improvement of the system." And indirectly, what it's saying, you need a formalized continuous improvement process, and so you know what your best practices are, and you want to let people experiment to get better. But you have to have a best way of doing it, and you have to have a stable process before you can do continuous improvement. And that was the point that he always drove home with quality. Well, the same is true with reliability or any other continuous improvement. Some people have their Plan, Do, Check Act wall. You can do it through a morning stand-up meeting, but regardless of what you do, you need a robust small team continuous improvement throughout your facility. And you need to have them focused on best practices every day for this to sustain.
All right, great. So we're going to move on to the next section, but I want to call out how cool it is that you had an opportunity to work with Dr. Deming. I read that, I knew that from your book, but it's worth pointing out, pretty amazing. So now we're going to move, and Klaus and I are going to talk a little bit about learning and continuous improvement at work in general. And Klaus, one of the things at the very first level, you talked about the importance of organizational culture, and here you've got you know, an engaged workforce and leadership. Can you tell us a little bit more in particular about an engaged workforce and leadership? And what, if I can drag you back, one of the things you talked about was like making sure people feel comfortable to talk about things, which falls in a bucket I would refer to as psychological safety. Maybe you can talk about that as well.
Well, there's a couple things, and in just the time I've been with the university, I've assessed or been in over 200 facilities, and in my 11 years with UT, and over 70% of those companies still point at culture and implementation as their largest roadblock. And those of you that follow my 2-monthly articles in Efficient Plant, you've heard me say often that 26% of North America said we'll struggle within 10 years if we don't get better at what we need to do on the plant floor. Well, that original survey was done 10 years ago, and that time is now. And why I say that is the data supports that now. In 1991, the average reactive maintenance percent for North America was 54%. In 2008, it improved to 34%. That doesn't mean individual plants aren't getting better, but on average, that's North America. That's thousands of responses. In 2015, that 34% went to 31% reactive. In 2018, it didn't get any better. Guess what? Just like I said, 10 years later, it's coming to a stall because we got to get to that tough stuff on the floor. And that's why, that's one of the reasons at the last Marcon conference, we were fortunate enough to be able to do our conference just before a lot of this stuff hit. That we did the reliability of everything culture improvement awards, so companies can share their journey in 3 areas of best innovation, best startup, and best sustainable. And so I think that that's something that just needs to be talked about more because everybody struggles with implementation.
All right, great. And then within that like bucket of organizational culture, which you're identifying as kind of foundational to this all, there's the kind of related issues of learning and continuous improvement, which is one of the things we're focused on today is learning. Can you talk to us a little bit about the importance of learning for continuous improvement?
I'd say a couple of things. Well, first of all, as far as continuous improvement, all top companies, at least that I see in reliability and maintainability, they figured out how to partner between operations and maintenance. I've had the opportunity I'll just look at the last 5 years to judge the Best Global Reliable Plant Award for Emerson. So those 15 top plants over the 5 years, every one of them in their first 5 slides in their final presentation said that we figured it out between operations and maintenance. We've got common goals. Here's how we do it. They all had an early roadmap to do that. But to get there, it takes both an engaged workforce, but it also takes the right leadership. Both have to change. And so I say it takes a different type of leadership style to develop a learning organization. Now, in lean culture, they start to talk about that with the Gemba walks, but what those Gemba walks really do is get back to what I said earlier. It develops a safe space, and that's really they say it in terms of lean sensei and so on. But what they're really doing is developing a safe space to solve problems. And how you develop organizations, full of problem solvers. And if for those people that truly understand lean processes, lean is really just a system to continually develop people. That's continuous improvement. And in my benchmarking days when I was with corporate, I looked at companies, all over the world. And one of the things I always get asked is, what do the best and best do a little bit different? And I always say it's so subtle, it's so simple to talk about, but so difficult to implement. And those 3 things are, and they still are true today, is small team continuous improvement. If you got that going, you get half your problems go away real quick. Second one was all those top best of the best performers. and a common practical problem solving process. So they've changed the thinking process from the person that sweeps the floor to the plant manager, but they're all thinking problem solving the same way. And they have a desire and motivation to do that. And the third thing is as simple as the check and the plan, do, check, act. And it ties into, well, what does that mean? That's those calibration walks. You can, in lean, you can say the Gemba walks. At Cadillac, we walk the plant floor every day for an hour in addition to an hour safety walk. And that hour wasn't just myself and a few people, it was dozens of teams every day. And it's people that are willing to ask the right questions rather than blaming or pointing, but asking the right questions to develop hundreds of problem solvers. And that's part of what that whole lean process really should be about.
That was great. Thanks, Klaus. Before we advance, I just want to call out some things I think you said that I thought were excellent. I think, there's an obvious connection between lean and learning, which I've always appreciated. Again, I'd love to hear you talk about the importance of learning organization for people interested out there. I'd recommend a good place to start is the book by Peter Senge. I thought it was so important. You mentioned it's do a Gemba walk, but really part of that is asking questions and the right kind of questions, so that you're learning from your employees and they're learning from you. And again, developing that psychological safety so people can, admit there's a problem, admit when they don't know something. And a great book on that is the recent one by Amy Edmondson, for people who are familiar with her. A couple things related to some benefits that we have seen working with some of our customers, Klaus, when they're, doing what they can to create that learning organization you're talking about. And part of that, and only part, we'll talk about this more when they're developing their training programs for their maintenance workers. One of the things is we're finding is a lot of our customers are finding it a lot easier to recruit and hire new maintenance talent when they have these kind of things in place, in particular a training program. And they're it's easier when a new customer or a new employee comes in and they see they have some training and support from initially as they're getting onboarded, and it's really increasing the employee retention rate. So you don't have to continually rehire new workers. And in particular, a customer I was just working with made a kind of series of training programs for their workers, which is partially represented here. And you can see there's a succession. And their maintenance techs now can see that there's opportunity for career advancement and growth through that assisted and supported learning process. Do you see similar things, Klaus, to the people you're working with?
Well, I agree with all the things that you said, and I think in order to have successful change, employees need to have both, I'll say, the skills and the opportunity to succeed, and more specifically, to behave in a way that supports the best practices, and more importantly, they have to know why it's important to do it that way. So it's a lot about, they need to understand their role in the big picture and why it's important. So it takes a lot more effort, on feedback right down to the person that touches the product, and as well as the maintenance teams and so on.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's really the second time during this webinar already, Klaus, where you talk about something that made me think about the importance of systems thinking and how you can't think of things in isolation, but as a manager, you need to be systemic to figure out how your system is working, but it's important for employees to understand that as well. Another thing we're finding is with technology tools, it's a lot easier for workers who might be out in the field and might need some information to use some kind of digital technology to get information they need right at the time and moment of need while they're on the work. So they don't have to do something like either just guess, like I don't really know what I'm supposed to be doing right now, and I'm going to guess, or maybe put work down, run across the other side of the facility and try to get something in a checklist that's in the other side of the room. And we're seeing this kind of like SOP, this visual SOP is something that people are using a lot. Are you finding that true? Are your customers putting information at the point and time that it's needed within using technology in this way?
Yeah, I see that. I see that some, I won't say a real lot yet, and I see it more in medium to larger companies because it's still not as easy as it's being marketed. Is probably the best way to say that. And you know, AR, augmented reality, might be a good example. You know, three years ago, somebody that look at the Gartner hype cycle, kind of what's the hottest thing and what's, you know, what's going to help us a lot and all that, augmented reality was right on top there. I mean, it was the biggest buzz, and now just 2 years later, it's right in the bottom of that whole thing, and it's kind of saying reality has hit, and it's not that practical for a lot of stuff. I mean, we shouldn't say a lot of stuff. It's not as practical as far as implementation. It's not easily implementable. It might take you 5 engineers now with different skill sets versus one. And you know, it's not as affordable as they thought. It takes a lot of trial and errors. So not many people have the money or patience to make that work. But you know, it doesn't mean its day won't come. You know, it just needs to be developed a little further from all the stuff. So I think there's a lot of good applications. They just need to be figured out a little better. And this is, you know, probably not the time to get it to talk about it here, but we're actually putting together a learning factory to do just that, to actually develop and deliver, I'll call them practical, easily implementable and affordable solutions. So for example, you can implement stuff that requires algorithms, but you don't have to do the algorithms, you know, and so on. And so what are all those showstoppers that make it tough on the plant floor? So we're starting to address those kind of things with the learning factory that we're putting together, and we'll talk about more later in the year.
All right, great. Look forward to hearing more about that. And I take your point, and I agree. I think there's a lot of, like, if you will, disruptive technologies in the world and learning and development. And some of them are more ready today and more mature, and others less so. You know, you can look at something like mobile, you can look at something like AR or augmented reality, like you were talking about, or virtual reality, and you can see the potential for all of them. What we're finding right now is that we have customers who are using mobile successfully for this kind of like digital SOP I was talking about. We do have like virtual reality and augmented reality course material or learning experiences or whatever that we've made. But I think in a lot of ways, as you're saying, those are not quite as mature as something like mobile. And then a last point before we get into the learning model section, I'm sure that most companies struggle with some degree of having tribal knowledge that lives in one pocket or with one worker, but isn't widely distributed. And one of the big challenges is sharing that tribal knowledge, and that's regardless of who has it. And obviously, in particular, that's a big issue recently because people, the baby boomer generation in the US is preparing to retire, and a lot of that knowledge and skills will go with them if you don't capture that knowledge. And also, I've never thought about this before, but it just occurs to me at the moment that I imagine a lot of companies are running into that problem right now. Maybe if they're working on a skeleton workforce, or if they have people working remotely because of COVID-19 as well. And that's another thing that we're finding people are able to, build into in one way or another, try to capture that knowledge and then distribute it. And one of the tools, the kind of tools they're using are some of these digital tools, even if it's as simple as a video recording somebody who has this knowledge and then using an online tool to distribute that. Are you seeing that kind of stuff as well, Klaus?
Yeah, oh, absolutely. Half of the world can retire if they want to, especially on the trades and some of those specific skills. And, you run into the thing every day where, you've got millennials coming in and again, might be supervising a group. And most of the people they're supervising are older than their parents or, could be their grandparents. And there's a big cultural difference. But older workers know how to keep the plant running. Younger workers, thank goodness, have the digital skills, can help get us, most of the companies to the next level. So I think anything that companies can do to get both groups together is a really good thing. Yeah.
Okay, great. All right, we're going to move on. I'm going to give you, to people out there, a little introduction to some workplace learning models. This is not unique to online learning, and really, if you are thinking about using online learning, I invite you to step back and think about some learning models. And then we'll give you a brief overview of a few online tools, and then move into Q&A. The first, Klaus mentioned it actually, this idea of a learning organization, and that whole, field or theory started, to my knowledge, in the 90s with Peter Senge, and it was updated by multiple people, including a really great trio of researchers, Garvin, Gino and Amy Edmondson, who I've talked about earlier, with some articles at the Harvard Business Review. But let's see if I've got 6. So what I did here is I took 6 traits of learning organizations, and this is largely based on Senge's list, but I also added one of the 3 characteristics from the list from Gino, Garvin, and Edmondson. And again, if anyone's interested in this stuff, you can find stuff at the Convergent Training blog or just email me. But the first thing you need is some kind of supportive learning environment. And to call out something Klaus has talked about a few times, that supportive learning environment has to include the psychological safety factor that we talked about. That's kind of foundational to being a learning organization. The next is to have some kind of concrete learning processes and practices. So, you know, whether it's online or if it's just a weekly team huddle, or if it's like post-job discussions where you talk about what went right and what went wrong, but you need some kind of process and some kind of routine practice for that. You need leadership that reinforces learning. And again, if you think back to Klaus's 14-point model, the relationship between workers and the leadership was right there at the center. You need to allow workers to develop personal mastery. This is from Senge's list. So that means because actually organizations don't learn, the people within an organization learn. And this is actually nicely tied in, because if you're familiar with Daniel Pink's book, Drive, where he talks about what creates motivation in workers. And again, Klaus was talking about how important it is to get small teams who actually want to problem solve. Personal mastery and mastery is one of the 3 things that Pink identifies as creating the kind of motivation that's necessary for all this learning, all this problem solving, and all this continuous improvement. I think it was autonomy, mastery, and purpose. So that fits in nicely here. This idea of team learning, sharing that knowledge, and Klaus already talked about that and how that fits in with lean in particular. And then we've talked multiple times about systems thinking as well, and looking, you know, at the workplace as a system, not trying to isolate things, being more big picture, not being so siloed, and so on. So there's a lot to be learned about learning, about continuous improvement from this learning organization theory. The second thing to think about, if you're in charge of the L&D or even just the operations or at your site, and you're trying to figure out how you can help facilitate learning at your site, is really learning happens in a lot of different ways. So we're trying to represent that here in 4 different buckets. In the top left, you know, there's your formal assigned learning. It's the kind of thing you develop on your own and you assign, or maybe you send workers to a you know, community college for a program or something and tell them to do it. And that's a part of workplace learning. But another big part, top right, is informal learning. You know, people learn on the job, really just by doing things through experience. They learn things socially by talking with a coworker. They learn through mentorship with a more experienced employee. Bottom left, and I would say this is something that's often kind of neglected in American management theory sometimes. And Klaus, I'm going to ask your take on this in a second. You know, we should have workers learning from their management and getting, you know, routine guidance and feedback and discussing that kind of thing and performance reviews. I don't know how every company deals with performance reviews, but I think a lot of workers dread performance reviews because, you know, they're not really valuable. They don't assist in the career development. But really, if managers were really interacting with their team and helping them learn and development, that would be a great accelerator of learning and continuous improvement. Klaus, what are your thoughts about that in particular?
Well, yeah, again, this is a fortunate time for enabling anybody that wants to learn, because there's almost anything you want to learn, you can, you know, today, and most of it's out there available for free. And maybe to reiterate what we talked about earlier, you know, if you're out there coaching and doing that with the people, you know, evaluations and performance reviews really just become a day, you know, another event that day. There's no surprises, and everything's been talked about throughout the year.
Yeah, that's a good point as well. And then another part of your learning ecosystem is performance support. You know, like people don't have to learn everything if you put the information in their hand when they need it in whatever form, a paper checklist, mobile learning, visual SOP, other kind of job aid. So if you're trying to improve the learning at your organization, you really should step back and try to figure out, what's my entire learning ecosystem and where can I get the most bang for the buck. Another way to think about the same kind of thing is the 70-20-10 learning model. And I'll return to this idea of the numbers in a second. But the basic idea is that workers learn 70% of what they learn on just through experience on the job, 20% through social learning, talking to coworkers, and only about 10% through formal assigned training. Now, the fact of the matter is, and this is, you guys probably know this, these numbers, 70-20-10, there's no solid data behind it. And so a lot of people have tried to rebrand 70-20-10 to experience, exposure, and education, or the 3 E's. But if you stop and look at the model, it makes sense. There's a lot going on with informal learning at an organization above and beyond the formal assigned learning. So yeah, continue with formal assigned learning, continue with your training and so on. But remember to try to, as much as you can, facilitate this informal learning too, that's coming from experience and exposure. Now I just want to give you guys a quick intro to a couple online tools. You're welcome to email me if you want to know more about them. I just want you to know they exist. A learning management system, or an LMS, is an online software application that people use to create, import, assign training, track it, and so on. Those LMSs, or learning management systems, can be used to deliver online courses like you're seeing here, but also instructor-led training, something like a PDF. So you can start managing all of that together. A lot of companies are using, through those LMSs, kind of knowledge and skill assessments. We have companies who are using it as part of their their hiring process to determine what the knowledge and skill of incoming employees is, potential new employees, but also to help people self-assess when they're for their own job and for a job that they want to get promoted to, and so on. The digital SOP I already talked about, so we won't belabor that. And then again, the mobile app and all the different uses for mobile app, including not just I want to mobile train, but or I want to use a mobile app to pull up an SOP like I was talking about, but also if I want to make an observation or report something to my coworker or my manager or something like that. And then I mentioned at the intro to this webinar that everyone's trying to. The world's changed a lot in the last couple of weeks. One of the things that people are trying to do is work from home remotely. Another thing they're trying to do is train workers from home remotely. So we do want you to know, we've been writing blog posts at the Convergence Training blog with some really great tips from some of the world's leading learning and development experts on just how to get online quickly, in many cases inexpensively or even freely. So we encourage you to check out the articles we're showing here, and we're writing more daily. So hopefully that's of help to you guys. And with that, I'd like to open it up for questions.
Okay, Jeff, we've got a few that have come in so far. I want to read you kind of a two-part question from Kendra out there. She's just asking if you can provide the authors and titles of the books that you recommended. I believe on lean and psychological safety were the two in particular.
Sure. What was it, Kendra? Is that right?
That's correct.
Thanks, Kendra. Hi to you, and thanks for asking. So the psychological safety book is by a woman named Amy Edmondson, and it's called The Fearless Organization. It came out only a year or so ago. She seems to be the leading guru in the field. And there's a tie-in between her book and her research and something you might be familiar with at Google, which was something I think it was called Project Aristotle. I don't know if project's the word, but Aristotle is definitely part of it. Where they did a study to try to figure out like what makes our teams innovate, what makes our teams improve, what makes them learn. And nobody's better in the world probably at data than Google. And so they were crunching all this, and they really couldn't find anything until they identified psychological safety. And so you'll see more and more stuff written about psychological safety now that the word's in your brain, if you haven't heard of it before. And we have articles about it at the Convergence Training blog as well. You can use our search feature. Learning organizations, that started, that theory, to my knowledge, generally is credited as starting with Peter Senge, and his name is S-E-N-G-E. And his book from the 1990s is called The Fifth Discipline. So he had 5 characteristics. I think that fifth discipline he's talking about is systems thinking, if I recall. That's the classic in the field. Another fantastic article that appeared at the Harvard Business Review was written by 3 authors, Gino, G-I-N-O, Garvin, and again, Amy Edmondson. And that article is called Is Yours a Learning Organization, or something like that. I apologize, I didn't get that exactly right. And then there are others, of course. And again, if you search the Convergence Training blog for learning organizations, you'll see a number of things we've written on that as well. And I think that's what I mentioned.
Excellent. Thank you, Jeff. We've got something here from Michael, and he's asking, how do we make sure that the informal learning processes are reinforcing the right processes?
Yeah, that's a good question. That's Michael, is that correct?
That's correct.
You know, you might, it's okay to participate in them as well. So I do a lot of work in safety in a field called New Safety or Safety Differently. And in particular, like, and so you guys might know it as resilience engineering as well. And one of the classic activities within that is called a learning team. And the idea, it's kind of actually an alternative to a traditional incident investigation. And if you think I'm going to stereotype it, and this might be caricature and potentially inaccurate, but if you think about an incident investigation in a worst case scenario, generally, you know, somebody comes in, they trace something back to an employee decision, they decide it's employee error, and then they arguably blame, shame, and retrain, and nobody learns anything. Obviously nobody wants that, and one of the alternatives in resilience engineering is an activity known as a learning team. And that's a situation where you get the workers together, and again, the bosses, managers can be there, and instead of kind of working backwards in that kind of arguably false linear sense of causality, and also that you know, that which is prone to cognitive biases and is often based on the manager not really even understanding work. You start on day one by just saying, tell me what normal work is. I know what my procedure is, and but I also know that humans vary, you know, circumstances vary, and as a result, humans have to make adaptations constantly at work in order to meet circumstances. And so people spend the first day or the first period just explaining what work really is. And that's a great way for everybody as a team, including management, to learn more about what workers are doing every single day. And it's not unlike, you know, what Klaus was talking about, of the importance of a Gemba walk. And then as a team, you can then move into problem solving. And you can do that for problem solving, but you can also do a learning team as a way to study innovation, or as even if you, you know, somebody innovated and you want to learn more about that, or even just you don't know why you're doing it, but you're going to study work and you'll end up learning things you didn't anticipate. So that's at least a partial answer, and feel free to write me and I can help you more with that.
Yeah, I might say a few things on that. You know, I think the question was, you know, informal versus formal. Whenever I hear informal process, to me that means there's not a lot of follow-up. I mean, you know, you do a root cause analysis, it means you talk about it, but did you really do a check that the Band-Aid you put on it worked? You know, is there a follow-up to make sure that you're really designed in? And then when we do assessments and I hear the word, well, we have an informal process, one of the questions we ask, and as soon as you start peeling back a few layers of that onion, there isn't a lot of follow-up. And another example might be is, you know, we've gone to places where they have 3 planners to do planning and scheduling. And you ask, well, how much formal training did you have? Well, Joe trained me for a week before he left. You know, everything was informal. So here's a plant that has 3 different planning and scheduling processes within the same building because nobody really taught them. You know, one guy kind of got it, 2 made up their own process to survive. You know, to me, that's informal. It isn't all that extreme, but I'd be real nervous when I hear informal.
Yeah, if I can like piggyback on that, I think one of the most important things about learning, I think this is true operation-wise, it's also true through a cognitive psychology perspective, is creating feedback loops, which is inherent in continuous improvement. So if the management is involved and if employees are giving feedback to management, and then management is giving feedback to workers based on that feedback, you're getting that productive feedback, which is really like the only way organizations learn is through that. And then, as Klaus is pointing out, making sure those things are verified that they actually did work. And then the challenge is distributing that. So, and if I can go backwards, if we're trying to like worry about, I want to make sure that informal learning, that informal messaging, and somehow I have some measure of control of it, and I can verify it. I understand that concern, but it's happening at every single company we're in constantly right now. So I think if you're actually actively involved in it and facilitating, you have a better, I think the concern is what if something is just straight up wrong? Because it's already happening, but if you're more involved in it by creating the kind of feedback loops and verification we're talking about, you have a better ability to amplify the things that are really good through the verification Klaus is talking about, and to tamp down the well-intended things that are in fact not good. Carol, anything else?
That's great. Thank you, Jeff and Klaus, both for your answers on that. So I want to say, I'm not sure if it's Louis or Louis, but he asked, you briefly touched on losing tribal knowledge. Is this a major issue in our industry? And if so, do you have any tips and tricks on how to retain this potentially lost knowledge when employees retire?
I think it's major, and I'm going to ask Klaus to talk about that, and I can come in, including talk about tips for capturing it, and then I can join in. Klaus?
Yeah, I think it's a really big deal. I mean, again, as I said, half the trades and specific engineers, they can retire around the world. And what you're losing is yeah, plants are getting more efficient. You can do it with less people. That's just the reality of moving forward. But what you're losing is that black book that all the trades carry around that said, regardless of what you tell me, here's what I do to keep the plant running. They all have their own little notebook, whether some is just in their mind, but a lot of them write stuff down and say, here's what I do. And that's what's walking out the door, and you'll never get that back. So the more you can match up younger people with the people with that experience, or even if it's just one older person with a group of young people, to start showing skills and giving them that kind of background, that's really missing today. So I think that's huge. I mean, even to the extent that you want to have some meetings to collect information, to retain some of that, how do you put it in some kind of digital repository and here's how they do certain things. I mean, before I left GM, we actually did an expert system on how to run maintenance, reliability, and so on. Actually, it's a trade secret, so it's a patent that will never go public. So I always joke, I always say there's a little R2-D2 running around with a mustache that looks like me. Well, not really, that was a long time ago, but somehow you need to retain that knowledge, and it doesn't mean that that's the best way to do it forever, but it's something to build on, and how do you get input from other people and put it together? You just got to do that, or you got too much walking out the door.
Yeah,
Great.
and thanks. If I could jump in there, Carol. So thanks to Klaus for that. Obviously, I agree with Klaus. I think it's a huge problem, and almost every one of our customers talks about that and struggles with it. I think in terms of how can I solve it, the first thing is to recognize it's a problem. The second thing is, once you've recognized it's a problem, is just try to do something, whatever it is, set up the kind of learning processes and procedures we talked about when we were talking about learning organizations, to capture that knowledge, and then second, which is really important, but also to share or distribute it. So, obviously one way that Klaus talked about it is, some kind of mentorship where a younger worker is working with an older worker. Which is informal. Another informal way, which I would encourage people to do, is just set up weekly lunch and learns, and let people share knowledge that way. It's not hard, you know, you don't need to be online. You don't need an IT background. You got a conference room and chairs and a whiteboard and you're started. Obviously, some ways to capture that knowledge, you know, Klaus was talking about that book that people have, these retiring workers, and a lot of times, as he said, that's a metaphorical book in their brain. So, you know, I've seen a lot of people having older workers, you know, writing this stuff down. I think maybe an alternative to some of that is going to be just making short videos with these workers where they're explaining processes and procedures. But any number of ways to capture that information, and then I think another challenge, and maybe even the bigger one, is distributing that, because ideally you don't want to get in the same situation where you're passing it from one tribal island to another tribal island and it's not being shared more broadly.
Great, thank you, Jeff. This one may be a little bit more of a direct question, but from Augustus, how do you deal with a supervisor who simply does not believe in training, possibly e-learning in particular?
Klaus, mind if I take that one? Then could you piggyback on?
Yeah, go ahead.
I think the benefits of training hopefully are obvious, and maybe the bigger concern is online, but maybe even the benefits of training are not obvious. You know, there's also, people are learning their job whether you train them or not, and they're learning it more or less efficiently. So if you're using training, which has actually been put together following sound principles of instructional design, adult learning principles, and evidence-based training, you will get rid of a lot of the inefficiencies that come with just hoping somebody learns something on their own, or maybe because you're hoping that they see what their older coworkers doing, or maybe because you set up a really super unplanned and informal mentorship or OJT plan. But you know, there are people who study how people learn, the best ways to create training. There's evidence behind what works and doesn't. I do have articles about that at Convergence Training blog, and I think that would help. As for skepticism about online training in particular, you know, the same point basically applies. You can have online training that frankly is horrible, and you can have online training that is really effective. And the differentiator is it built with sound instructional design principles and evidence-based training methods? And you know, the exact same true is in the classroom. You can have great classroom training and horrible training, and it's all because of what you did in that training. If you want, shoot me off an email, jeff.delto@vectorsolutions.com. I can send you a report to 3 studies, including one in particular by the learning researcher, Dr. Will Thalheimer, which is titled something like, "Is e-learning effective? What does the data show?" And actually his study, which is actually a meta study, shows that e-learning is actually more effective than classroom training, but his explanation is just because e-learning more often is made by people who understand instructional design principles. So again, there's nothing magic about classroom training or e-learning. Both can work, and every professional, including myself, would recommend you use both in a blended learning solution. Klaus, any points?
Yeah, a couple of things. Maybe directly, I think, you know, probably 70% of the training can be done equally well, you know, live or online if you have the right, you know, e-learning class. I think there's some things that really need to be done hands-on, and so I wouldn't say 100% could be e-learning. So I would have to disagree with that, but I think a lot of it can be e-learning. And I believe in the adage that if you care about your people, you know, they'll care about you and your business. You know, whether that's that's safety, learning, and all those things that people need. And I think you know, a lot of you have heard kind of a comment that's been passed around a while. It's kind of a joke, but it was actually a true statement that, you know, in a meeting that I heard, they said, you know, they said kind of like, what if I train them and they leave? That's a concern to some supervisor. Or what if I train them and they get certifications and they leave? And the answer was, what if you don't train them and they stay? You know, I mean, what do you want? And when you look at the payback on training, you know, like maybe if the person doesn't believe in it, show them the benefits financially. we do a combination of live and online training for our certification, especially if they're a partnership here with Red Vector. But we do projects at the end where people have to implement. You certify with the project, and that's a deliverable back at the plant. And those deliverables on those projects have paid back 3 to 1 up to 100 to 1. And we're talking, from monies of 50,000 into the many millions, and the average is about a 20 to 25 to 1 payback. So, so if they don't believe in the learning, they'll surely believe in the savings evidence.
Yeah, I'd agree with that, and I can hook you guys up with some studies of high performance organizations and research that there's a learning company, and I apologize, I forgot their name, Brandon Hall, I think, and they show with the same kind of positive effects that Klaus is talking about on ROI. And just to clarify, I completely agree with Klaus. There's always
we're not talking about this ROI. These are projects that have already been done. So this is firsthand evidence. It's not taking somebody else's stuff.
Fair point. And I just want to say, I completely agree with you. There's always going to be stuff that people need to do, be trained in person or hands-on. And again, that's getting into your blended learning approach, which is, again, what I'd recommend. But definitely Klaus is right that there's always going to be things you need to teach in person or in that manner. And, who knows, maybe down the road when virtual reality is more mature, maybe that'll change a little bit, but come back.
Yeah, at some point we'll have my digital twin teach you with AI and virtual reality, and that will be as if you're there anyway. I'll back off on my comment at that point, right?
I look forward to that, Klaus. All right, Carol, are we done?
Well, we do have more questions, but I think it's fair to say we'll try to contact those of you folks that had questions here and we just didn't get quite to them. We're a little bit past our hour mark, so I want to be respectful of everyone's time. But thank you all so much for joining us today. I thought the information was really very helpful, and I hope you did too.
Hey, and thanks everybody. And we invite you to use either the emails, Klaus on the left, Jeff on the right, if you want to email us with any questions as well.
Yeah, I was just going to mention as closing, if there's any common questions, Carol, if you put those together, we could probably answer those and put them at the end of this recording.
Absolutely, that sounds good.
If you want to listen to it, later, they can do that if they have interest.
Okay.
Thanks, Klaus. Thanks, Carol. Thanks everybody out there.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Healthy.